So, welcome back to Legitimacy, everyone. It's Thursday. We're always happy to have you. I was screwing around with comedy again last weekend in L.A., and I asked a comic. I'm horrible with names. I can't remember who it was, but a writer for one of the television shows that unfortunately I don't watch. Are any good essayists out there? Who do you read? And he suggested Norm Macdonald's, based on a true story, not a memoir. So I picked it up. And there is some pretty funny stuff in here. These are old jokes. This is a Chevy Chase line, but I give it to you because some of you who come here this morning come for the trenchant social commentary. Some of you come for laughs. Some of you realize that both are appropriate to every topic. Here we go. The post office announced today that it's going to issue a stamp commemorating prostitution in the United States. It's a 10-cent stamp, but if you want to take a lick, it's a quarter. Hey, while we're on the topic of sex, let's talk about funny. And I know we have to have this little riff every time. I'm sorry, Bambi. I don't see your mommy in a tight red dress waddling through the woods. She's always lithe and not a fanny. So Fani Willis, another reason not to trust her. We're aware of Fannygate. She appoints Nathan Wade to the Trump RICO prostitution prosecution and pays him handsomely for her services. Question: did she get something in return in terms of financial benefit in the course of their romantic affair? Defense: there was no romantic affair, and if I got anything at all, I was paying in cash, and if we went anywhere together, we were touring the sites of civil rights homicides and so forth. Almost certainly a lie. During an 11-month period before Wade was appointed, there were at least 12,000 text messages, 2,000 phone calls, and then cell sighting. Geofencing stuff locates Wade near her home in non-working hours some 35 times. The only reasonable conclusion to draw from this presentation of data is that they were love struck. And that's not a crime in the United States, at least not yet. I mean, maybe there'll be a 28th Amendment, thou shalt not sprout wood, in public or something. But it's not a crime. So what is the crime in my view is Fanny lying about the relationship she had with Wade for the sake of ambition. Not long ago, just the other week, in fact, I reread Homer's Odyssey for the umpteenth time. I don't know why I'm drawn to it again and again. I guess because life is a struggle and we all wander against the possibility of getting someplace that looks like home. And we often have to make difficult decisions living by our wits amid struggle. And so I reread it, and what struck me this time were the Homeric and the sort of ancient Greek hospitality rituals and the meditations on graceful old age and the fact that no one gets out of here alive. And also, in the hospitality, so the book was initially composed as an oral poem, an epic poem, and recited at public events. It was put to writing years afterward, but it reflects the life of Mycenaean Greece. In other words, mid-2nd century BC Greece, a Greece that is lost to us because of dark ages. And what those dark ages were is unknown, but that civilization was wiped out. But what we see in Homer is a world filled with people who constantly encounter strangers and have to give an account of themselves in the world. And so it's not uncommon in Homer any number of times to see someone come to a person's home and the person is first welcomed in, then offered meat and drink, because you honor Zeus by honoring the stranger. And when they'd had their fill of meat and drink, Homer might say, the host turned to the guest and said, "Tell me about your people. Tell me where you've come from. Who was your mother? Who was your father? How did you arrive here? What boat brought you?" Because these are the Greek Isles. Surely the wind didn't carry you here on wings that I cannot see. And the respondent will typically say, "I'm Mike Boyer. I know your mom's name because she listens here. I'm not going to say it out loud. I don't want to drive away the 6 listeners we have. I'm Mike Boyer. My parents were so and so, and they are the descendants of. They are the descendants of so and so. And this is the interesting part, and this is why I will never forgive Fanny. They were the product of a mating between a god or goddess and a man or a woman. And what's the point in that? What you for many, many years, the first 12, 13, 14 readings of this book, when I got to those lines, I'd be bothered by it. And I'm like, oh, gods aren't banging people. I mean, enough. And then I realized that the act of procreation, being selected and chosen by love, is almost divine. No one can account for it. No one is worthy of the love they receive. Everybody is looking to give love, and the blessed among us have an opportunity to exchange it. And when you get that, it is such an overwhelming gift of grace that you can't help but think that the world is enchanted. And so, thus, in the Homeric world, a god or a goddess would make love with a progenitor because rationally, there's just nothing that can account for the origin of life and of love other than divine intervention. So, Fanny and Nathan were given that gift. Aphrodite or Eros or whomever descended, alighted, and they decided for one moment to throw caution to the wind and simply to be with one another and to be in one another's eyes. And for whatever reasons, whether it has or hasn't, that relationship ended. So they drank from the gift, they drank from this fountain, and now they're being questioned about it. Now you'll say, well, what about sin? What about morality? What about the 10 commandments? What about this? All the rules by which we live are rules of thumb that we create for the law of large numbers. We have, in fact, rules against adultery and so forth, for a reason. And that is that in a world in which people randomly engaged in assignations, chaos would ensue. And we want stability. We cherish families. We cherish commitment. We honor the virtues. I get all of that. But I also know that at the margins, if you didn't take a risk, life wouldn't go on. And thus, the heroic myths give us the courage to recognize the presence of the divine in our life and to accept it. And the bards sing of these assignations between the gods and men as a way of praising the courage of the heroes to engage with the divine. And the gift that they give us then is the gift of life. And how we manage it, well, that's the business of civilization. And obviously, as Freud pointed out, in Civilization and its Discontents, we have to have rules or we'd go crazy. But rules, ladies and gentlemen, rules are made to be broken. And Fanny and Nathan broke the rules. And they did so because they're human. And that's a glorious thing. But they're denying having done so for the sake of what? Ambition. Fanny wants to remain in the prosecution. She was given the gift of love, and in exchange, she'd rather be a footnote in a history book written 100 years ago that she took on this prosecution. So shame on you, Fanny. You're unworthy of the gift you were given. Nathan, come clean. Buy her a dozen roses, a bracelet, walk back into her arms and say, I've staked everything on you, Fanny, and I would give anything to have you back. That's what makes the world go round. Not prosecutions for RICO of the 45th president of the United States. Shame on you, Fanny Willis. You looked the gods in the eye and said, I am not worthy. And you know what? You're not. So anyhow, that's my 15-minute or my 10-minute rant on that. I just wrote an essay on that this morning because I woke up thinking about it. I wanted to share that with you. I'd be curious about your thoughts. There are other things going on in the world beside that. Among them is Alec Baldwin got whacked. What happened? Or not Alec Baldwin.
Alec Baldwin did not get.
Excuse me. Not Alec Baldwin, his armorer. Yeah.
Indeed. So we talked about the Rust set many months ago. And, the basic facts there that, there was a Colt 45 brought onto the set. Live ammunition was brought with that, allegedly unbeknownst to anybody on the set. Alec Baldwin pointed the firearm at a member of the crew, pulled the trigger, gun discharged live ammunition, killed one person and wounded another. And we have set about the business of trying to understand how the application of New Mexico's involuntary manslaughter regime would be levied against not only Alec Baldwin, but in this case, the armorer. And so what we have is ultimately a 2.5-hour deliberation after a couple of weeks of trial. The jury declined to convict on, I think there was another charge that declined to convict on. I can't remember what it is right now. But for all intents and purposes, we have a guilty verdict for the charge of involuntary manslaughter because of the negligence involved in allowing live ammunition to make its way to a movie set. And I guess the jury believes what the prosecution says when they said that a foreseeable consequence of allowing or being so negligent is exactly what happened here. Alec Baldwin's trial is not supposed to start until July, Norm. And, while I'm not necessarily surprised with this conviction, I am concerned that Alec Baldwin is going to avoid uh, accountability for this by what would be the corollary, the civil corollary, or I guess the criminal corollary to an intervening and superseding cause, something that falls outside of that direct and proximate regime that would be required for a jury to believe that as a consequence of one's negligence, that the damage that befell the situation was foreseeable. Not sure what you think about that, but I'm certainly concerned that this conviction of the armorer is going to be seen or at least argued by Alec's attorneys as an intervening and thus superseding cause that would prevent the application of liability.
Well, let's unpack all that. You've said a mouthful or two. So, this is obviously a homicide conviction. Homicide is the unlawful taking of another life. And the states have various legal codes. Each state has its own legal code. And then there is a federal legal code. And the point of saying a legal code is to say that these are criminal statutes, laws passed by legislatures that break out elements of an offense. In other words, things that a jury must find in order to convict. So homicide is the unlawful taking of a person's life, and it's graded in a number of different ways. The most serious form of homicide is is homicide that you set out to commit, and if it's set out to be committed in some especially heinous or aggravated way, you could face the death penalty in some regimes. And so, in Connecticut, for example, my home jurisdiction, murder is the conscious objective, the specific intent to take a life, and then taking a life. I take a gun, I load it. I look at you, I say, AMF, yo-yo, bam, you're done. That's a pretty good case for murder. I mean, I might end up with a client like that. I might lose the case, and the haters would say, oh, Pattis, you lose everything. Note to the hater. Could you win a contest between an idiot and yourself to the nut house? I mean, that's not a case you're going to win. And sometimes people try those cases because you have no choice. You can't accept the consequences. This was not murder. Then there is manslaughter. And manslaughter comes in a number of different forms. Manslaughter is not the specific intent to take a life, but it is nonetheless the taking of a life. What am I referring to? So you might it specifically intend to cause physical injury, serious physical injury, but cause death. I'm going to break your legs, Boyer. And I take out my Louisville Slugger 36-inch Louisville Slugger. And I'm referring to a baseball bat, ladies. Okay. Don't get excited. I take that out and I whack Michael around the legs, and he gets some blood clot as a result of that and dies. I didn't specifically intend to cause his death, but I did. And so that might be manslaughter. Another form of manslaughter is engaging in conduct that is so reckless, so heedless of the consequences that you show an extreme indifference to human life.
Wanton
And reckless,
disregard, if you will.
yeah, reckless disregard as a matter of law is being aware of a serious and substantial risk of harm and doing it anyhow. And so, that's not quite what this was. Some states have involuntary manslaughter. Some states have criminal negligence. In that case, and the crimes look very similar. In that case, a person fails or refuses to do something that represents a gross departure, a significant departure from what we expect others to do. And as a result of failing to do that act, there is a substantial risk that something bad will happen. And so that's what happened here. The armorer was responsible for management and treatment of the guns on this set. She failed to check to make sure that the chambers were empty. And I don't know the evidence in this case, but I know that there was some discussion early on that these weapons may have been used for target shooting along the way. And so maybe she had knowledge that the weapons could fire. She didn't check to make sure it was empty, and she was handed it. She was involved in preparing for it to be handed to a person who had pointed at another human being. That person did so, and boom, there you go. And so I think that the verdict, frankly, makes sense to me, given the law that I understand. If I've got somebody whose responsibility it is to manage weapons on my set, I don't want. I would want them to be responsible enough to check to make sure the weapon isn't loaded, so that when I point it at you, it doesn't go off. So that's that. Now, this business of superseding intervening
Well, and
cause.
just to back up for a second, and that's why I brought up the sort of the civil, giving you what I would call the criminal corollary, but giving the civil framework of negligence, right? It's a breach of a duty that
Mhm.
causes damage, right? And what you just discussed in civil terms would equate to a duty, the establishment of a duty, and then the departure from that recognized duty. What a reasonable person would or would not do in a given set of circumstances. And I think that when we think about the armorer on a set of a movie, we can very easily answer the question of what the duty of the armorer is, right? However, it may seem as though, well, you're dealing with firearms. A key element of your duty is to make sure there isn't live ammunition. That may or may not be reasonable. I don't know. I don't know the industry. And like you said, I don't know what the evidence suggests. But at least for those of you at home kind of tracking the legal concepts here, criminal, civil kind of run in parallel in this context, involuntary manslaughter or criminal negligence, and then some sort of like civil litigation mind, you can map the same on top of each other. And that's how I, as a transactional business attorney, am able to communicate effectively with somebody like Norm who practices in the criminal realm, and when I do not.
Well, and actually, we have the same law degree, so presumably, we hopefully can understand one another. Although, when you get going with that, under 40 kind of lingo that you kids use, left in a spiritual and moral vacuum because of the fact that you think libraries are places to store books as rather than places to go to take out books to read, to nourish your soul, so that when your geriatric co-host goes off on a riff about courting and goes off on a riff about um, neighborliness in Mycenaean Greek, you don't think Mycenaean.
Well, look,
Isn't that a cough syrup? I mean, come on.
I definitely didn't have on my bingo card that Fannie Willis would be in somehow compared to Odysseus today. But we get what we get.
Have you ever fallen in love, Mike?
I have, I have.
Well, you didn't choose it. It chose you. And then you had to you had to respond to the choice that you were given. And that
I
is
made
the
room.
activity
I
of
made
great.
room. I've made room as soon as you started talking. I made room for what you were saying.
All
As
right.
fast as I
So
know.
now let's talk about this business of superseding intervening cause. Um, this is a crazy example, but there was a time in my life where I taught at a law school briefly. I don't think we've ever talked about that. At a college, rather, I taught business law, believe it or not, when I was a baby lawyer, and they were non-lawyers. And because I was a lawyer and had a law degree, they stuck me up in front of people, and I had no freaking idea about business law, but I knew a little bit about law. I'd just passed the bar exam. And so when we used to talk about causation, I'd say, imagine the following. You're on a train, the IRT one in Manhattan, and you're going from 42nd Street to 96, let's say. And while you're on the train, a person sneezes, and as they sneeze, they jostle the person next to him, who then causes you to spill your coffee on your shirt. The result being that you have to change your shirt before you go to your next appointment. You're late for that appointment. Your boss gets irritated because now he can't file something on time that was part of a proposal for your company. And that proposal would have involved a weapons management system that would have put an extra trigger lock on the ignition of nuclear weapons. And it was a superior trigger lock to the other product. But the time to file those proposals was 5 p.m. And because the guy sneezed who caused the man to jostle into you with the coffee cup, that caused you to have to go home and change your shirt, that caused you to be late, that caused your business's proposal not to be on an inferior product, was approved because it was the best product filed on deadline.
Oh,
As a
look,
result,
cause is a modern liberal's wet dream. I will.
in fact, because an inferior product was used, a nuclear war was mistakenly launched, and the result is destruction of Western civilization. Question: is the guy who sneezed responsible for causing the war? Of course he is. But for that sneeze, the story would have turned out otherwise. The law says, look, come on, that's ridiculous. We've got to break the causal change somewhere. And so the notion of proximate cause is near cause, legal cause, cause that is, in fact, a substantial factor in bringing about the bad event. A superseding intervening cause breaks the chain. And so in the Alec Baldwin case, his lawyers will be tempted to say Alex had good reason to rely on the armorer's expertise, and in relying on that, he was correct. And her failure to do what she did is, in fact, the cause of the harm. And the prosecution's going to have to go on and say that independent of the armorer's failure, Alex himself had duties, and he failed to do so. I think it's a harder case for Alex. I really do. You know,
You think it's a harder
Alex,
case for him to defend against, is what you're saying?
no, a harder case. Yeah, no, I think it's a harder case. It's hard. It's hard for this. Yeah, it's a harder case to prove against Alec. I think he's got a better shot at
Well,
defense
and
than
that's
the armorer
certainly,
did.
yeah, and certainly just so we're clear, intervening, superseding factors aren't always superseding. Intervening factors aren't always superseding, in other words.
Yep.
And so what I'm concerned with is there enough evidence in the record that would be able to uh, attend to Alex's duty such that the conviction of the armorer is not lethal, right, to the prosecution's case in chief against Alec. In other words, are there circumstantial events, other facts and evidence that would maintain the integrity of that causal chain? That Alec had a duty as a actor handling a firearm on a movie set, that duty was clearly breached, that the intervening cause of his armorer not checking to see if there was live ammunition is not superseding, and therefore the actual and proximate cause of the other Hannah, what is her name? Hannah, I believe. Her death is directly and proximately related to Alex's negligence or his
And
involuntary negligence.
one problem that Alex will have is what I'll call the guilty mind problem. He denied ever pulling the trigger, and there is forensic evidence from the FBI that says he did. And so, did he deny too much? He would have been better off saying, "Yeah, I pulled the trigger because I thought the gun was empty." Oh no, I never pulled the trigger; it just went off. And the state will argue that that statement, that false statement of fact, in its view, is a window into his mind and helps to show a guilty mind.
100%.
This is the so-called consciousness of guilt doctrine.
What the defense would essentially have to argue is that when an actor in Alex's position takes possession of a firearm, that they have no accountability for what happens when they pull the trigger, right?
Oh, yeah, Alex said Trump is to blame for the woman getting shot, and of course that's true. Because when Trump stood on Fifth Avenue and said I could grab a woman in the pussy and no one would care, Alec knew that at that point he could shoot somebody and wouldn't care, and Fanny knew that she could grab Nathan by the crotch and he wouldn't care because we live in a dumpster diving world. Nice, good job, Junior. Hey, hello to Junior Toll down under in Australia. We gave the weather forecast down there for today already, Julian. You were late, so you're just going to have to endure it. So look, the quick comedic interlude before we move on. I'm just loving this Norm Macdonald book. A new FBI study shows that for the first time, Americans are more likely to be killed by a stranger than by a loved one or acquaintance. Their advice: introduce yourself to as many people as possible. So what's up with this, Mike? Is the Biden administration secretly flying airports to a migrant airport or to an airport near you? You know, we talked about this years ago. I'd heard from David X. Sullivan, former member of the United States Attorney's Office in New Haven, former congressional candidate in the 5th District, that there were special flights coming into the Westchester Airport in eastern New York on the western Connecticut border, and they were coming in after 11 or 11:30, just before the airport shut down for the night, so that there'd be no one in the terminal. And in those flights were undocumented migrants who were then shipped into buses and hustled out of there before anybody could ask questions. And, you know, when David told me that, I thought there's a reason his middle initial is X. You know, he's been reading the X Files. Now I'm starting to think he was onto something. What's this all about, Mike?
Yeah, so apparently some FOIA requests that have been lobbed against the Department of Homeland Security are showing troubling I guess facts in support of David X. Sullivan's proposition to you. Several years ago, we're looking at a lawsuit that is claiming that more than 320,000 immigrants have come into the country between October 2022 and December 2023 via what's known as the CBP-1 app, or the humanitarian parole application on phones, that allows for migrants from other in eligible places: Cuba, Haiti, Venezuela, Nicaragua, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Colombia, Ecuador, to simply use an app to gain access to flights into the interior of the US and circumvent or otherwise avoid going through a port of entry, a lawful port of entry.
All right. Well, I mean, keep an eye on it. For whatever reasons, I'm not seeing a lot of reports on this in local papers. I think a story like this might inspire local journalists or citizen activists to ask what's going on around town. I mean, we have seen
Recall what I was
stories.
talking about with respect to the school here in Greensboro.
I do, yeah,
Um,
and
and
then
these sorts of and because Greensboro has such a major airport, and because it is a commercial airport, FedEx is anchored here in Greensboro, major FedEx facility. I told you about the touch and go practices for all branches of the military, including the planes that are from time to time regarded as Air Force One. This is a major, and so even though they're listing that there are 43 airports that have been used pursuant to this CBP1 app, they're not disclosing which airports. My thought
I
is
don't understand that. I mean, I simply don't understand that. That is our government at work. You're not going to tell me that this is classified for national security reasons. People have a right to know what's going on in their community. And we've got the government shipping people into our communities without telling us where, when, or why, or how many, or how often. That's outrageous to me.
Yeah, I think that what I've said in the past, especially when we talk about the southern border issue and what is much more palpable and visible there, is simply that I can't understand how we are not getting any transparency, any explanation for what is a very obvious policy of this administration. No justification whatsoever. Just allowing a complete dislocation of people from foreign trade zones into the United States as if we are nothing more than an economic zone.
We need to have an honest discussion about immigration. I'm not so sure that I'm going to buy the Club America view. That is that you're unless you're an anointed member of the club, you have no rights or role to be here. This is a land that has been characterized by migrations with awkward consequences, aka American history. But I think the level of migration right now has reached historic proportions. Some say because of climate change, others say because of economic dislocation in Central America and elsewhere, and some say that the two are the same. And the result is that tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people are streaming across our borders and placing stresses on our communities. People in those communities have a say, it seems to me, about what to do about that. That's the point of being a people united under the rule of law. So let's keep an eye on that story.
Certainly will. Certainly.
So I want to, I'm gonna be heading down, I think, to Atlanta soon. I got to meet somebody out in LA who has some comedy venues, and I'm hoping to take my show on the road. I want to alert everybody I'll be back at Mohegan Sun on March 21st. It's 10 o'clock. I mean, it's past my bedtime, probably past yours too, but I'd appreciate it if you came out and showed some support. I'm trying to work my way up the comedic food chain, and having people turn up to buy tickets actually turns heads and might make it possible to get some other gigs. What's anything else going on in the world today, Mike?
We've got the State of the Union address tonight.
Oh, we do.
Yeah, we do. So we'll have the corpse of President Biden,
No.
drugged up as best as his medical team can drug him up, and we'll see how long it lasts. You know what I mean?
No. Yeah, I know. Well, what's the difference between geriatric sex and Biden's State of the Union address? They're over far before, the event is over far before anybody expected it to be. I knew something was going on tonight. I didn't know what. But I had to be down in D.C. I might have to be down in D.C. tonight, and I was going to stop at the local Cracker Barrel for a late lunch, but they shut it down from 5 to 5:15. I understand that's when Biden's going to give the State of the Union address before he has his senior chicken wings special, and he should be home tucked into bed with Dr. Jill by 6 o'clock, saying, there must be how many ways to leave your lover, dear? And she'll say, Joe, I don't know, keep talking, and I'll show you a new one, right?
Cracker Barrel. I love Cracker Barrel.
Here's my favorite story. I'd never been to a Cracker Barrel, and my father, who abandoned me as a youth, re-emerged in my life about 45 years later. And we were talking about Homeric rituals for greeting strangers. You'd think he'd take me to a feast. We end up in fucking Cracker Barrel. And I'm thinking maybe I didn't miss him so much after all. Maybe all those tears were wasted. But I did enjoy the eggs over easy with ham and the biscuits. The biscuits were to die for.
Oh, divine. Yes. Something that you should compare to Odysseus's journey maybe tomorrow. Cracker Barrel biscuits. That's your challenge.
Don't issue challenges that you don't want to see me. Mike won't be present tomorrow. He's suffering from anticipatory boredom. He's announced that I'm on my own. So we know how well that'll go. I'll have to turn the thing on, keep it on, and then try to figure out how to keep talking.
Yeah, we did. And before we get out of here, I do want to just acknowledge this. We will talk about this tomorrow, what I have on the screen. So the SEC, that is the Securities and Exchange Commission, not the FTC, not the FCC, the SEC has proposed a rule standardizing disclosures from companies regarding gas emissions and climate, like material climate claims. The document is over 800 pages long. Most of that is to comply with existing SEC disclosure frameworks and providing all that pathway. But we will talk about this, what I think it means, and perhaps what it does for a future precedent of how the SEC will begin to course more of the green new Green Deal or whatever the hell we call it these days. I don't give a shit. Anyway,
and this is an example, folks, of why the United States Supreme Court is continually invited to reconsider the Chevron doctrine. That is that doctrine that gives administrative agencies discretion in how to apply their rules and regulations. What does the SEC have to do with greenhouse gases? Anybody know? All right, let's end with a little bit of Norm Macdonald. The American Academy of Pediatrics has announced a list of unsafe baby products. Topping the list are those really, 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 really high chairs. Thanks for listening to Legitimacy, folks. We'll be back tomorrow. Folks, Mike, how do people find us?
You can find us on X at LawPod Daily. Many of you over there today love seeing the X following beginning to grow. You can find us on YouTube at LawPod Daily. And also over there on Rumble, I'm getting some complaints from the chat about the fact that the static stream key no longer requires me to do double the work every day. So if you really want to know what we're going to be talking about every day, you can just go look at YouTube, or you can look at X. That'll give you a preview. I guess I'm just, not in the mood to play Rumble's games these days. I don't even know what kind of statistics we have over there, Norm. Ever since using the static stream key, which they were cooking for like 2 years, we are losing subscribers, and I can't see any statistics. So if anybody out there can call me an idiot and tell me how I access that stuff, I'd appreciate that. Otherwise, somebody just give a note to Rumble and tell them that they suck.
Here, note to Rumble. Fuck off. All right, we don't need you. We don't want you. Ban us. Thanks, folks. We'll be back tomorrow. Hey, wait a minute. What's this I hear? Psycho dog in the background. Junior Coltrane says your dog is a racist. I don't know.
Which one, the black one or the white one?
Who's that behind you? Is that your dog, or is it one of your new kids?
Look at Danny.
Okay, all right.
Look at him. Little three-legged dachshund.
A three-legged dachshund.
Yeah, man.
Okay, folks. Welcome to Law and Legitimacy, where only we have three-legged dogs and our wives bark. All right.
See you tomorrow, Norm. Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.